This moment right here is a special one. And those of you who have played the game know that this pursuit can go any which way. From a short heat level 1 pursuit that's done and dusted in a matter of seconds, to something escalating to heat level 5, where one little mistake could mean you getting busted. More importantly, however, this moment symbolizes something new. Something which hasn't really been seen or done to this extent before in the Need for Speed franchise. This game is the successor to Need for Speed Underground 2, and it brings to the table a lot of changes and new additions. Gone are all the underglow neons, spinner wheels, and scissor doors, and you're no longer waking up people at 3 AM with your Farcan Honda Civic. A lot of people see this installment in the franchise to be their absolute favorite, and it's easy to see why. It spices up everything the previous games had, and it bumps it all up to 11. From some of the most memorable and iconic cars to the most exhilarating police pursuits in the whole franchise. It has a story which was actually interesting, and it felt like your own little movie in which you were the star. And the story is kind of a transition from riches to rags and back to riches, which managed to capture the imagination of so many kids who grew up playing this game. But enough of all of that. I'm here to talk about how it felt to play Need for Speed Most Wanted. Need for Speed Most Wanted came out in 2005, hot on the heels of its predecessor, Underground 2, and it had some pretty big boots to fill. It had to one-up the previous game in pretty much every aspect, and it managed to do just that. It did away with some things, such as the drift events and street acts, but it added so much more. The game had newer and more extravagant cars, and some new race events as well, but it also changed the visual customizations into something more tasteful and tame. The game also had a much better story, with a really hateable villain, and it starts off in probably the most iconic Need for Speed car ever, the BMW M3 GTR. The addition of police pursuits is just icing on the cake, and for many people, including myself, they are the best part of the whole game. And this is probably due to the iconic soundtrack which accompanies them, but also just how absurd they are and how badass you feel when you do them. And the game does each one of these things, from racing to pursuits, phenomenally well. And as a whole, all of these things produce one of the best, if not the best Need for Speed game to date. I'll cover each one of these aspects in the video, and I'll try and describe how it felt to experience them for the very first time. I'll also try and highlight some of the more standout moments in the whole game. So sit back, get comfortable, and let's begin. The first aspect of the game which I want to cover in terms of how it felt is the actual story itself. As I mentioned in my previous video, these older Need for Speed games tend to start you off with all the good cars. They kinda want to give you a taste of what's to come. But Need for Speed Most Wanted ramps this up to the extreme, and I'm not gonna beat around the bush about it. The game starts you off with the car that you can say symbolizes the whole Need for Speed franchise. And yeah, I'll admit, I'm a Need for Speed Underground 2 fanboy, and I love Rachel's 350Z, but I'll give credit where credit is due. The BMW M3 blows any other starter cars in the franchise out of the water. The naturally aspirated V8 sound, the straight cut gears, and the exhaust note, coupled with the wide body of the car and the big wing and the now iconic livery are all awesome. The game also introduces you to all the main characters, Mia, Razor, and Sergeant Cross. And Cross's introduction itself is both badass but also infuriating at the same time.
Nice pinstripe.
I'll get you, bitch!
You do all your races and you face Razor, who is the number 15th guy on the blacklist. And just as you get comfortable with the car, it's taken away from you by him. And hearing the sound of the car breaking down as a kid is one of the most memorable and worst experiences that I've had in a racing game. And I remember being genuinely angry when I found out that he had risen to the top of the blacklist with my car. And I knew I was being set up for a game like no other that I had ever played before. I knew that the story was going to be special, and I couldn't wait to get my hands back on that car. And playing the game and going up the blacklist, and getting those calls after races from either Mia, Cross, or Razor, made the whole thing feel a lot more real. And sure, I'll admit, the story can be a bit cheesy at times, but it's what holds the whole game together, and it does its job incredibly well. And the ending of the game with Cross yelling "everyone" is one of the most memorable moments in the whole Need for Speed franchise.
Everyone!
And the story concluding with that intense police chase in the M3 feels like the perfect way to wrap up this great game. Doing races in Most Wanted after having finished Underground 2 feels both familiar but also different at the same time. The game does away with some things, Drift and Street X events specifically, but it also adds some new ones, Tow Booth, Lap Knockout, and those weird radar races. But back when I was a kid, I was genuinely upset that Drift events weren't a thing in this game. I just didn't understand how they could just get rid of something that they've done already. And looking back at it now, I don't really know how the Drift events would have fit in, to be honest. In a weird way, the game is just fine as it is without them, and it doesn't need them in any way, shape or form, but little me was really disappointed at their absence. And all of the races in Most Wanted had something in common, however. In general, they felt a bit harder. The AI cars felt like they would put up more of a challenge. And when faced with a sharp turn, whether in a race or in a pursuit, your speed breaker was your best friend. Being able to take the turn in slow motion has saved me from crashing out so many times. And a few small mistakes and crashes here and there could cost you the entire race, as you get past in the last 10% of the event with no hope of overtaking the other car, and that felt awful. And speaking of cars, Most Wanted, much in the same way as all the other Need for Speed games from that era, had rubber banding. And for those of you who don't know, the game basically matches the opponent's cars to your car. It would also have drivers either catch up to you or let you catch up to them to keep it more exciting for the player. This however results in two things happening that I found both funny and infuriating when I played this game as a kid. And every now and then you would see a racer crash out on a minimap. And as a kid, when I saw that I was like, easy race, no chance of me losing this. But I would then just see the other racer manage to always close the gap and catch up to me, and I had no idea how they did that. But looking back at it now, I know it's the rubber banding at work. On the other hand, the thing that pissed me off during my playthrough for this video was when drivers would just slam on their brakes just as I was catching up to them. Sometimes with no apparent reason. Like straight bed of track, no turns, no nothing, and the guy in front of me just, slams on the brakes. I don't know why they do that. Okay, I know that they're programmed to, I get that, but I don't get the idea. Whether it's them cleverly brake checking me or it's just the rubber banding being painfully apparent. I don't know, but it's just annoying. And this felt especially bad in those radar events that I talked about before. And just as you're approaching the speed camera, you're trying to go past it as fast as you can to get the most amount of points added to your score, and the guy in front of you just decides to stop, and you rear end them, which could cost you a lot of points and eventually the race. And going over to the topic of progression, the game follows a simple formula which works surprisingly well. As you move your way up the blacklist, you need to get a certain amount of bounty, and complete a set number of races and police milestones. It felt nice because the game would offer you more races than you had to do for each blacklist member, and as a person who hates circuit races, it was awesome to have the option not to do those. And as I moved up the blacklist, the cars started getting faster and cooler. They changed from Lexuses and Golfs to Mitsubishi Evos and then to Mustangs, Lamborghinis, and Vipers. The coolest thing, however, in terms of progression, happened after you beat a blacklist member. Being presented with the cards and getting to select two felt like I was playing Who Wants to Be a Millionaire. And scoring a blacklist member's car felt amazing. And as a kid, I just loved seeing how many of them I could actually collect in my garage. I felt so slick after managing to win an expensive car for free basically. But that however made missing one of these cars feel a lot worse.
Okay.
And similarly to the previous Need for Speed game, Underground 2, you would unlock new upgrades for your car and parts of the city as you progress the story. And I just loved driving up to the upgrade shop and seeing what I had unlocked after I beat a blacklist member. It just felt so exciting. And additionally, in this game you also had to buy your own cars, which meant mismanaging your money could screw up your entire playthrough if you weren't careful enough. And jumping over to police pursuits real quick, when running from the cops, you can't get to the full 5 stars right away. The game kind of eases you into pursuits in general. It first starts you off with roadblocks, and then you get into more aggressive police and rhinos thrown at you. Then you move on to roadblocks with spikes and helicopters, each level of heat being more intense than the one before it. And as a kid, going up the heat levels for the very first time was honestly a scary experience for me. This was probably because all my older friends had hyped it up for me, so I was excited but also spooked at the same time. I didn't know if I could handle it. But I'll stop there because I really want to cover pursuits fully a bit later on in the video. And moving on to the customization aspect of the game, it's definitely a lot more simplified. Having one shop for everything was nice from a convenience standpoint, but it was also kinda bad as well. This is because I really liked discovering all the shops in Underground 2, and missing out on that was a bit of a letdown for me. But it's just a small one, so it's no big deal. And modifying your car is limited to the 3 performance, body and paint customizations, so gone are all the specialty shops, meaning that there is no neon, hydraulics and trunk layouts. But to be honest, the game is perfectly fine without them. The whole atmosphere of the game, from the music to the setting and the story, it all feels a bit more mature. And you know, don't get me wrong, it can still be over the top as any other Need for Speed game, but the neon and all that stuff from Underground 2 would have been a bit too much in my opinion. And everything does feel a lot more simplified. You don't get to choose the specific parts from the performance packages, and the whole tuning of your car is limited to a section in the pause menu. And as a whole, you can make some of your cars look pretty decent. But I do have some mixed feelings about the visual customization. It keeps everything a lot simpler and refined, but as a kid I felt as if they got rid of a few too many things here and there. Like for example the number of vinyls you can have on your car. As an adult, I don't really care for vinyls, but as a kid it was a bit of a letdown that I only had one shot at it. And yeah, I'll admit, some of the body kits still do look horrendous by today's standards. And having played Need for Speed Underground 2, you notice that they recycle some hoods and spoilers from that game. But for the most part it's fine. And in general, it gets the job done and the game does allow you to get some pretty nice and clean looking cars. And I know I'm making a lot of analogies with Need for Speed Underground 2, but in my opinion these games are both so similar and different at the same time. They're both considered to be some of the very best that the franchise has to offer. And as I've mentioned before, Underground 2 brought free roam to the Need for Speed franchise. But free roam had something missing. You didn't have to be a big brain genius to figure out that something wasn't quite right, and that all the street racing you were doing wasn't quite legal. And as all of you who have played the game know, Most Wanted has free roam, but it's free roam with an extra spice added to it, the police. And police pursuits are the name of the game here. No, like legit, literally, they are, like the game is called Need for Speed Most Wanted for a reason. And doing the pursuits for each Blacklist member did feel a bit intimidating at times. I was playing this game for the very first time and my driving skill was that of a 10-year-old boy. Because well, I was just that, a 10-year-old boy. And I would crash out way more often than I would like to admit, and having the police on my ass was really scary. It was the fun kind of scary, don't get me wrong, but I was still driving around a bit like... In playing the game now, however, I would say that heat level 1, 2 and 3 are all a joke. In those early heat levels, you just have to babysit the cops. They would run into shit, crash out and take themselves out. Meaning you would have to start the pursuit all over again, which was really annoying. And in general, you just kinda have to drive a bit slowish, and make sure you don't set off any pursuit breakers. And speaking of pursuit breakers, there is one that works like 95% of the times. In all fairness though, a lot of the pursuit breakers do work pretty well, and it's super satisfying seeing all the bounties of the patrol cars rack up. But this one is special because it's in the path of the biggest cheese tactic in Most Wanted when it comes to pursuits. And driving around this highway right here was so easy to do because you would constantly be at a high speed, and you could easily do all your milestones there. There's another cool trick as well, which this highway route allows for. It's tapping the rear tires of a wood truck and spilling all the logs on the road. It felt so awesome pulling that one off, and best of all, when you wanted to wrap it all up, the stadium was right there for you. You just kind of swerve to the side, trigger the pursuit breaker, and wrap around back to the cooldown spot. But this strategy, however, isn't without its risks from Heatfall onwards. And getting your tires popped is a real threat, and it has happened to me multiple times. I take my attention away for just a second and I don't look at the minimap or I don't hear them calling it out on the police radio, and the next thing I know, I've gone through the spike end of a roadblock. And this felt especially bad the further you got into the story, where the milestones take a while to complete and having your pursuit get ruined like that just felt horrible. And when dealing with roadblocks, we had our own way of doing it. The game does its physics differently, depending on where you hit the police car, so every time I would aim for the rear end of the patrol cars in the blockade. What also feels bad is pressing the car reset button when you're in a pursuit and you flipped your car over. That resulted in you getting busted immediately. And come on, admit it, we've all done it. And it was a lesson that I learned the hard way, and I was pissed off when it happened, but at least I knew what never to do again in a pursuit. And the heat level 5 cops on the other hand are no joke either. Seeing those police SUV rhinos come at you is terrifying regardless of heat level, but on heat level 5 getting hit by them would result in you getting boxed in almost immediately, because those cops were like a wolf pack. And if the cops are like a wolf pack, you could actually run into Cross himself, and he would be the big dick alpha male. Anytime I would see him, I would set it as my personal goal to take him out immediately, and this was probably because his bounty was super high. But you really do need to be careful on heat level 5 though. It feels as if they can surround you in a matter of seconds, and before you know it you're all boxed in, looking down at the pursuit bar turning red and filling up, and you're bouncing off the rev limiter and you know you're about to get busted. And managing to escape from such a situation, however, feels like you cheated death. Because it all happens so quickly, from you driving at pretty much top speed, to being boxed in, to just barely making it out, it all makes for one of the coolest and most badass feeling and stressful situations that the game has to offer. Those situations and the pursuits in general are when the game feels the best. And this feeling is achieved by a lot of things, which when they come together make for a great experience. I feel that two of these things are the sound design and the sensation of speed that you get when you play this game. I want to cover the sound design first. If you've played this game and I tell you Police Pursuit, what do you think of first? I can bet that a good majority of you are gonna say the Police Pursuit music, and you would be completely right. The pursuit music in this game is straight up the best that the series has come up with to date. There's no other way around it. It is that good. It makes you feel like you're in your own little movie and you're the star in it.
I've got ground units clearing up and en route.
The police music in this game captures the whole essence of the police chases perfectly. It's just the right soundtrack to this high-octane action. And I'll throw in the surprisingly detailed police chatter and the amazing car sounds into the mix, and the feeling that you're in a movie just gets amplified even more. And the way the game portrays how fast your car is going, with the slight shaking of the screen, and the blurring around the edges, just adds the cherry on top to an already superbly crafted experience. And just as you get your hands back on the M3, as I mentioned before, the game goes out with a bang. The final police chase felt more intense than anything I had done in the game prior to that. Rockport PD literally throws everything at you, and playing it as a kid felt both frantic and awesome at the same time. It felt like that because by that point you know all the tricks in the game, you know how to handle your car, and this final pursuit is the ultimate test of your skills. That drive to the bridge after Mia calls you feels like the final stretch, and jumping over it and seeing all the patrol cars fall off it felt amazing. Most Wanted spiced up the entire Need for Speed formula. It took the best parts from the previous Underground games, and it added its own little spin to them. It removed and changed some things, but what it added is what makes it stand out amongst the rest. It's a street racing game to its roots, which properly introduced the police into the whole formula. And not only did it just introduce it, but it also embraces it, and it has it as an integral part of both the game and the story. It's a game with a more mature setting, that has something for everyone, and it's rightfully regarded by so many people as one of the best Need for Speed games of all times. It introduced so many new cars not seen before in its predecessor, Underground 2, and it refined the customization into something cleaner and nicer to look at. It continued the trend of Need for Speed games having some of the best, if not the best sound design out there when it comes to racing games. And hearing the Carrera GT's engine screaming at 7,000 RPM down a tunnel, or the rumble of the V8s are some things that I still remember to this day. And the soundtrack of this game is probably one of the most memorable ones as well. And because of all these reasons, Need for Speed Most Wanted is an iconic game, one which set the bar so high that people still look up to it to this day. It is by far the best Need for Speed game that the early and mid 2000s had to offer, and it is considered by so many people to be their favorite Need for Speed game. And that's why it will forever be remembered as one of the classics with which so many of us grew up with. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you guys in the next video.